Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. I'm Mitali Mukherjee. Thousands of farmers have gathered at the borders of Delhi to observe Kaala Diwas or Black Day on the 26th of May. The day marks 6 months of protests for the farmers against the three farm laws that were introduced by the central government. Since that period, 11 rounds of talks have taken place between both parties, the government and the farmers, but talks were called off in January this year as both sides felt not enough was being achieved. What's important though is that what the farmers are fighting seems to have global echoes, all the way to the Midwest in the United States of America, where similar laws were enacted decades back and have gone on to have a debilitating effect on small farmers and on their incomes. What are the lessons to draw from the Indian protest, and what could that global resonance mean for farmers across the world at this point? Joining me to talk about that are three gentlemen, and let me introduce them one by one. Dr. Bedabrata Pain, who is a former research scientist with NASA. He is also a filmmaker and a documentary maker, and he is currently working on a documentary titled Déjà Vu that looks at the farm crisis in America and the parallels to be drawn with what's happening in India right now. Joe Maxwell is co-founder of Family Farm Action Alliance. He's a family farmer. He served as Missouri state legislator and was Missouri's 45th lieutenant governor. During the past election cycle, he has been assisting presidential candidates in terms of developing their antitrust, agriculture, and food policy positions. And George Naylor, who has been farming his family's farm since the 1970s. In the early 2000s, he served as president of the National Family Farm Coalition. He's a member of the Via Campesina, and he was a lead plaintiff in the national lawsuit against Monsanto. He is currently serving on the board of Center for Food Safety and Family Farm Defenders. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you all very much for joining in on this conversation. I must admit at the start, when Bedabrata reached out to me, I don't think I understood the depth of how connected the two stories are. So let me start with that, Bedo, in terms of the film, the documentary that you're working on, and the ironic name that you've given it, which is Déjà Vu, and what it is that you found when you started studying the similarities between the system, the farming system in America and India.
Great. I think that would be a great beginning, and I think Joe and George can take over from there. Yeah. Since a lot of the stuff that I learned is from them and many others that we interviewed in the process. Last September, October timeframe, when there's the three laws that came in, and maybe briefly we'll touch upon the laws, I started looking at what's the experience in elsewhere in the world, and when the first thing I actually read was about farmer suicide in America.
Yeah,
and that was a first shock to me that you associate America with prosperity, with land of milk and honey and opportunity and so on, and that's what should be. And then I started investigating more, and it became very clear that the things that these farm laws are trying to do, or what the government ideologues are saying, is exactly what American experience has been for the last 4 decades, and hence the name of this documentary, Déjà Vu. And our idea was to kind of bring that experience for the Indians, because it's, if you have to go through this, we should go with it with our eyes wide open.
Yeah.
Déjà vu, because it's almost, from the perspective of the American farmers, it's the same thing happening all over again. And that's the experience they'll tell us. But before I go there, let me very briefly touch upon the three farm laws that are being talked about.
Yeah.
And I think, I think the first one is about what one would call contract farming, which is to say that the big corporates or big agribusinesses can directly make contracts with the farmers to produce something at a certain price. And that is being touted as that will bring great prosperity to Indian farmers. Essentially, and then the second law is the APMC Bypass Act. APMCs are these government markets where farmers more or less get to sell at a fixed price, which is called MSP, the minimum support price, which is very similar to the American concept of parity. And And our government and various economists are saying that it's the government interference in the market that is preventing price discovery, that is not giving opportunity to farmers. If farmers can directly sell it to these big corporates, then they'll get better price and they'll get better things to be more competitive. And it's so essentially getting rid of any kind of support prices and having to sell directly to the big corporates is what is being shown as a way of farmers getting better prices, them becoming entrepreneurs, them and getting prosperity. So that's the essential backdrop in which our documentary happened, and we traveled through a large number of over 10,000 kilometers, talking to many farmers, and it was really an eye-opening experience.
Yeah.
And humbling experience.
I can imagine. Joe, let me turn to you, because I think the lessons lie in history. It is only for us to choose to see them. And I want to go back to the 1980s and that call at that point of get big or get out. What was happening across the farming landscape at that point, and what came into shape in terms of, what today exists as farm laws in the US?
The experience here in the U.S. as far as family farmers are concerned is that it began a little bit in the 70s with Secretary of the United States Department of Agriculture, Earl Butz, talking about getting big. But it really came to fruition during the Reagan administration and allowing these very large corporations to really become behemoths in the marketplace, to really own and control the market. Laws were changed, all in the name of this is better for you, farmer. You're going to be able to specialize. You're going to be able to find these markets. We're going to get you in touch and directly with the largest companies that know how to make it happen, and they'll make it happen for you and your rural community. Well, the reality is what happened was total extraction of the wealth and opportunity in rural America. Built profits in these large corporations at unprecedented amounts of billions of dollars per year, all through the extraction off the backs of the workers, off the backs of the communities, and out of the pockets of the farmer.
George, I want to talk about some of the internals of these laws. As Beto pointed out, one point of contention for farmers is the minimum support price, or the MSP as it's called here. But there's so much more. There's limiting the power of states, not the central government, but states, in terms of how they are actors in this entire decision-making for farmers and paying for their produce. There is the negotiating power that seems to have been handed over to private parties, where there is no floor in terms of what a farmer can talk about. In your experience, what is most problematic about these laws? Because, as was just pointed out, much of it seems to have been structured from the architecture of what exists in the US.
Yes, that's right. And I'd like to underline the fact that a minimum support price is probably the most important aspect of farm policy if you expect to have family farmers and if you expect to have their communities benefit from the hard work that they do. The minimum support price in the United States came about in 1933 in the Roosevelt administration, in the depths of the Great Depression. But that institution of the minimum support price should have been kept in place all through the years. And let me make it clear that besides having a minimum support price, that price needs to be adjusted for inflation. So let's say that at some point, the minimum support price was $2 a bushel for corn. Well, after 20 or 30 years of inflation, $2 a bushel is meaningless now. It will not cover the costs of farming. And so you have to understand how important this is to the rest of society. If farmers aren't getting an increase in their income because their prices are increasing with inflation, there's only one outcome, and that's you're going to have fewer farmers. And those fewer farmers will end up farming more land and trying to increase their yield. So what happens is the farmers that remain will use whatever technology, whatever chemicals, whatever, to try to hold on to their land. And they're competing against each other in this case. And so consequently, what you will have is pollution from the use of chemicals, your rural communities being decimated. And you will also lose family life, because lots of times in order to stay on the farm, one or more of the family members will find jobs in town, which is a recipe for having two different lives. One spouse might be on the farm and the one spouse works in the town or the city, and now they're two different worlds. And so that's a recipe for a dissolution of marriages. So this is not it is fundamental to have a minimum support price. And we use the term parity to refer to the fact that that minimum support price will be adjusted for inflation over the years.
So that's an important point, because at this point, the central government's tone and feedback has been that the MSP is here to stay, at least from the government's point of view. It's not going. Do you think farmers should take that as a given, one? And on the second point that George raised, which is that there will be an illusionary nature to this. For a while, it will seem like prices and price realization is rising, but that's a function of the larger parties squeezing out the smaller ones. And as was pointed out, the fact that inflation makes this less and less lucrative for a farm.
I guess I think I can only talk about this one small aspect that we saw of whatever I researched, and what we saw is that things don't happen in one step. Like even this parity prices that went away in America started with Reagan's time. The first sector that was attacked was dairy, where the parity prices were gone. In grain and so on, it wouldn't happen for another more than a decade, another 12, 13 years, when 1996 Freedom to Farm Bill came in, when the parity prices were completely eliminated. So, what the government is saying today doesn't mean that they're going to follow up on that tomorrow. In fact, everything tells us that the governments do not live up to their words. And the way they're going, more importantly, what leading economists are saying is that the reason why we are bringing this private initiative in is that the big private investments and efficiencies we are bringing in is to sidestep everything that the government is apparently doing to distort the market. So the way these myths are being propagated is that the only way the distortion of market happens is through government intervention. But what they completely don't talk about, and I would like Joe and George to talk about it, how the biggest distortion of market actually happens in the hands of the biggest corporates. And perhaps, Joe, you can talk about it, what the American experience is, how these big guys came and completely ruined the small farmers.
Yeah.
And Beto's exactly right.
Let me ask you to jump in on that, but also add the fact, for people who are watching this to understand that just like India, in America as well, the majority here we're talking about are small farmers. I know in India, the definition is the land that you hold, but we're talking about small farmers. Please go ahead.
Well, first, everyone in the world needs to understand that industrial agriculture and these giant corporations, retail to agri-food corporations, do not feed the people, do not feed the world. They use a myth, well, we got to feed the world, at least in the United States. We got to feed all this population that's growing. The fact is, those small farms that you reference feed the world. 70 to 80% of the food we eat as people is raised on very small acreage, just like those farms in India. That's who feeds us. What Beto has said is exactly right. It happens in steps. They come in and paint this rosy picture about how great this investment will be, which grants power over to the corporations that they have not had before in the United States, and now they're doing it in India. And from that power, they gain and extract wealth, and they become more wealthy, therefore more powerful, and they gain more political influence because they are out there with all the dollars, and the politicians believe, oh, this is just grand. And what you wind up with is a very small number of companies. In the United States, 4 companies control over 80% of our cattle market, over 60% of our pig market. The same is true in the grains, in the milling, in the processing. They now control the entire food system. So the farmer no longer is worrying about what the government actions are and how much involvement the government has in the market. The problem is the amount of power and the influence that these large corporations have in the market. They begin to dictate in the United States and almost around the world with these types of laws changes. We need to understand there's a handful of CEOs at the head of these corporations. Most of them are white males who have one intention, that is to dictate who's going to farm, what they're going to farm, and who gets to eat. And in the process, they're going to extract our resources, extract our wealth. They're going to abuse the land, abuse the environment, abuse the rural communities, abuse the workers, and abuse the farmers as they put more and more dollars in their pockets. That's who's running the markets in the United States. That's who's interfering in the markets, is a handful of corporations and their CEOs.
Mitali, could I add a thing to that?
Please.
Yes, actually our minimum support price mechanism began, the promise of parity began to erode in 1953 when one of the most right-wing secretaries of agriculture was in charge. And so the minimum support price didn't increase for basically 2 decades when everything else was inflating. So that's one thing to remember. It really started in 1953, and my family's been farming on this farm now for over 100 years. So I know what the result of that is. But also, you mentioned contract farming. Well, let me tell you how that works. So basically, all the farmers are desperate to stay on the farm. They'll do just about anything to stay on the farm. And some of them will sign contracts with these big corporations. The corporations say, well, if you raise this many more head of livestock or this much more land, you can, and we'll make sure that you stay in business at this certain price, which seems, well, it's not very good, but it's a little bit better than going broke. But what happens is when they get enough locked up under those contracts, they don't have to pay hardly anything to the rest of the farmers. So the rest of the farmers suffer from this contract situation. And eventually, the only way you can stay in a business, and Joe can verify this for raising hogs and things, the only way you can raise hogs or even almost cattle is by signing a contract. And once you do that, you're totally under the thumb of these big corporations, and you have no idea what they're going to hold, what's going to be held in store down the road.
Joe, there's another narrative that's being built, against the farmers, if you may. One, the fact that the government or people speaking for the laws have tried to divide the farmers in terms of the ones who are more privileged, such as those in northern India, in areas like Punjab, versus those who are not. And a lot of points have been made about how these farmers have been cosseted. They've been given a lot of relief in terms of their electricity bills. They've been allowed to grow something which is not the best crop, round after round of wheat. Is this something that you saw happening in the US as well, trying to sort of, divide what the farmer's stand is? And, how would you respond to the fact that, they've been given SOPs, they've been given relief on electricity, they've been given relief on irrigation, for example?
Well, George mentioned exactly what goes on. Farmers are willing to do anything to not lose their farm. Many of us are multi-generational farmers, and we value that lifestyle. We value that heritage that we have. And sometimes farmers will choose to get in bed with the corporations. In return, those corporations will give them what we call sweetheart deals. They will give them a little more money per head of animal than they do the neighbors. They do this, one, to control the market, as what George indicated, but they also do it, not unlike what union busters in the United States do, to divide the farmers, to give themselves 2 or 3 farmers in a community that will defend the actions of the corporation, to push back in the coffee shops and in the places of worship and elsewhere when someone speaks out against the social injustices that these corporations bring, to have a farmer with, as I say, with a big belt buckle and a big cowboy hat say, oh no, they're doing great by our community. Well, they're doing great by that farmer because that farmer is getting paid $70 more a head per cow or calf than anybody else in the community. They're driving the new pickup, driving the new John Deere tractors, while everybody else is going broke, and the workers in those plants are being subjected to COVID at a rate far exceeding any other class of people in the United States. The majority of the workers in our processing plants are people of color. And the discrimination within that agriculture system against people of color is horrendous. They have the least power. But what they do, they grab a farmer, they grab that face, and then that farmer's face goes around to defend the abusive practices of those corporations, pitting one farmer against the other. It's kind of an old union busting way of doing business, and it's been successful. But that's how they operate. They care about one thing: putting money in their pocket and taking it out of yours.
Yeah.
Bedabrata, it's not just dividing the farmers, between each other. I was reading some of your older interviews, and I was struck by the point that you made about how urban America has no clue what rural America is living through. I mean, they might as well be living in 2 different countries, and the fact that farmers in America feel more strongly about what's happening in India. It's the same situation here as well. Urban India has a very different perception of this farmer protest. There are all kinds of accusations being slapped. 1, that they are gathering at a time when the pandemic is raging. 2, that this is causing disruption. 3, that they probably have enough, economic leeway to sit and protest since, they're not going back home. How does one negotiate, these sort of mental makeup?
I think these are all great things. I mean, it's funny that those who are today all of a sudden showing concern about farmers and COVID and so on are exactly the ones who, when the farmers protested, didn't even raise a single thing to support them. It is actually amazing that there is all over the world, there is such a disconnect between the urban and the farmlands. Like even if we didn't go down, and saw firsthand what was going on, we didn't have an idea. So I think it's extremely important. And I think at some point, when we were talking to Joe, he had made the point that it's not a battle for the farmers alone. It's a battle for everybody. Food security, food sovereignty is a question for everybody. Let me point out, they always say that they pit eaters against growers, that is the farmers, by saying that, the farmers are getting more money. If we have more efficient farming, food prices will go down. Let me give you a very simple statistics. In last 40 years in America, food prices have gone up by 200%. Guess how much the wage of the bottom 90%, which is the majority of the population, 90% of the population has gone up by 15%. If that is the definition of food becoming cheaper, when the food prices have gone up by 200% and the wages have gone up by 15%, well, then, I think as George had pointed out to us, that there's this economist, Joan Robinson, who had said that the only reason to study economics is to let you know when the economists are lying to you. Something to that effect. I'm not getting the exact quote right, but yeah, but I think all the questions that you raise, these are such important issues. The subsidy question, again and again, the question has come up: parity versus a subsidy. On one hand, the government takes the parity away in America, takes the parity away, so the prices drop. Farmers don't get prices, don't get the right kind of prices. Then government comes in and gives sops in forms of subsidies. So you see, it's a very insidious thing. Farmers actually don't want subsidies. They want parity prices because that's the way they will ensure a proper living. Instead, the parity prices are gone. Big corporations come in and depress the prices. Farmers get nothing. Then government comes in. It actually causes a calamity. Then government comes in and puts in subsidies. And what's happened over the years is that even that subsidies, 90% of the subsidies goes to top 10% of the farmers. And in India, the amount of subsidy that's given is actually far less than what's there worldwide. That statistics is also there. I can give you that statistics. But so in whichever way you look at it, this myth that is being portrayed, that somehow by having this open market, this thing that there is free market. Where is this free market? We can go sector by sector, as Joe was talking about.
Yeah.
Top 4 companies control in the grain, in industrial equipment, in seeds, in pesticides, in meat is humongous, 70-80%.
Yeah.
And that's what Indian farmers are staring at right now.
Yeah.
Could I add something?
Yes, please go ahead.
Beto brought up the question of big farmers and little farmers. Well, I've been, when I was president of the National Family Farm Coalition, I visited with farmers all over the world. And I heard the same rationale, the false rationale that is being told to your farmers, that they'll say, well, look at that. You're only farming 2 hectares. How do you expect to make a living on 2 hectares? So you got to get bigger. Well, the fact of the matter is there's no end to that rationale. So you might farm 1,000 hectares and you still won't be making a living, and your livelihood will be at stake even then. So in my community now, when I started farming in 1976, I'd say the typical farmer farmed 300, 400 acres. Now the typical farmer farms 2, 3, 4, even 5,000 acres, and sometimes 10,000 acres. And many of them go broke because of the low prices. So there's no, that rationale that, oh, you're too small, that is not right at all. And as Beto said, the subsidies are just a Band-Aid that may keep the system from crashing, but you will end up with fewer and fewer farmers, and the corporations get to buy their commodities cheaper and cheaper.
Joe, here's the reality of the situation, though, as it stands, for your farming community and ours. You have the farmers against agrochem giants and large corporates and big government. How do you think this is going to go? I mean, I'm just asking you for your own sort of gut instinct of how you think this should go and what the farmers should continue to do at this point. The 26th of May marks 6 months of their protest. It hasn't yielded what they are pushing for at this point, but how do you think it should go?
Well, I'll tell you, I think everybody needs to realize that when there's no economic democracy, which is what parity prices, minimum support prices represent, democracy in general suffers. And you will find in our communities that our institutions don't really operate anymore with the consent of the governed or our opinions. The average person's opinion doesn't mean anything anymore. It's just a few people making decisions. And also our landscape now, instead of being populated by family farmers, of course, like I said, we have big farmers, but now when you leave the city limits and go into rural areas, you're actually entering an industrial zone. Now they can put up huge windmill farms to generate electricity without anybody having the right to say that I don't want one of those in my backyard. And so whatever goes, the farmers have to put up with now because there really is no democracy left.
Joe, same question to you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first, I would expect that the government in India is playing by the same playbook that the United States government did in the 80s when we had the great tractorcade in Washington, D.C. And that is just simply wait the farmer out. At that time, one of the things that we really didn't understand as farmers was the need to reach out to the consumers and our friends and cousins and relatives in the urban and suburban areas. This is not a fight about just the farmers. This is about a fight for who's going to dictate who's going to get to eat in the world. This is everybody's fight. The only way the farmers in India can hold on, and I beg them to do so, the only way they can do it, though, is if the rest of the population joins with them, stands up and says, we're not turning our food security, our nutrition security, our opportunities for our communities over to a handful of corporate CEOs. We're going to leave it in the hands of the people. So I hope that the farmers will stay there. I hope they will stay embedded where they are. And I hope that the citizens of India will join with them, because it's only then, when we join together, will we turn back to a system that is economic democracy, where people are first and center. But that's what I see. That's what we didn't do in the United States, and we have paid the price.
Bedabrata, final word with you, 5 minutes to go. One expected countries like the US to speak up, perhaps because of the force that was shown against the farmers, but we did not see that happen. And as was just pointed out, it's a who blinks first situation. The law is there. It has not been enacted because of this pushback. How do you think this one will close up?
It's a very big question, because, well, one should not expect the US government to suddenly change colors and suddenly become pro-farmer when in their own country they have been pro-business. And I mean, we don't have time. We can talk about how the political power and the economic power have meshed together to create the situation that's there. And both Joe and George can talk about it at length. So I think we have to realize that what's happening right now is that there is a connection between those who are in power and those who are the big corporates who stand to benefit the biggest from these laws. Let's make something very clear, that if these laws go through, if this kind of agriculture goes through, who would lose out? It's the farmers. Far from getting more more money or more prices, they will actually see even worse than what they are today. Who would lose out? Those who are eaters. Prices are not going to come down for the city dwellers. It's not. Who would win? It's the big corporates who would take everything from the middle, as I think the word that was used. They will mine, and at the cost of both the eaters and the farmers. And how would that stop? Well, it's a political fight, and I think that's what the farmers are waging right now. Right now, we in American experience is that before this free market rhetoric and all came in, farmers used to get 50% or 50 cents to the dollar that was a consumer will spend. Today, a farmer gets maybe 14 cents to a dollar. So from 50 to 14. That's the experience of opening up of contract farming and so on. We didn't even go into the tragedy of contract farming, where today 71% of poultry farmers who are under contract farming live below poverty line in America. So I think this is something that all Indians should know. That's I think the reason why we are making this documentary with Déjà Vu, because it's not a matter of speculation whether this is going to be good or bad. It's already happened in front of us for 4 decades in the most powerful country in the world. We should learn from that. That's my only point that I would like to make.
Yeah, and I think the saddest parallel as it exists is the spike in suicide rates, not just for America, but for India as well. The bigger irony over here is that for an economy in India that has been struggling so much, the one thing that's held us up is our rural growth, our agricultural growth. And here we are, throwing that out of the window, really, or at least throwing their wishes and their representation out the window. We're completely out of time, but thank you so much. It's been such an illuminating conversation. I really appreciate you taking out the time to speak with me. Thank you again.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.